Hello, Peter. Thank you so much for joining the internal comms series that I run on my blog. As you know, there's a long-running series with thought leaders on how internal communication is perceived and what are some of the nuances of it. So, in this particular episode, I want to ask you an important topic and a question on executive presence. So, before we get started, Peter, if you could quickly introduce yourself for our audience.
Hey, thanks, Anishu. And I think you've become the North Star for all of us in terms of internal communications. So I keep referring to you and to your work. I think you're doing some commendable work here. So my name is Peter Yorke, and I'm currently SVP of Marketing at SunTec Business Solutions. So we are a company which is basically into the relationship-based pricing and billing, and we have a product that's sold globally to more than 130 banks across about 45 countries. So I run the marketing for the entire company, including the communications mandate, and work with a team of about 6 other colleagues.
Great. Thanks, Peter. So let's dive into the question. The first question is about how important is having executive presence as a communicator, as a manager, when you go about your work?
See, in my view, communications is at the heart of any business. Ultimately, you can make or break a business with or without your communications. So it becomes very important for us to ensure that not only are we heard internally, but we're also heard externally. And again, being heard externally doesn't mean through us, but also through the various people who are channels of communication for the organization. It could be the leadership, it could be colleagues, it could be regional heads of sales, it could be anybody who has an external presence in the organization. Which means that we need to occupy a mind share of theirs, because when they're doing their conversations, be it one on one with a customer, be it one to many at a conference, be it across a board meeting, they need to reflect the communication mandate that we are trying to drive in a company. So I think that becomes very important for us to kind of impress on that. And we've seen all too often, and this is a common occurrence, you write a script for somebody in the leadership, and then they go off on their own and do their own thing. I mean, we've seen that many times, and let's not kid ourselves, that happens. That clearly shows that we're not being taken seriously, and we need to reflect why, and maybe we're not resonating with the overall vision, mission, and message of the company. So we need to reflect and see how we can get closer to that mandate that we've been given.
Okay, great. So, how do you describe executive presence? What are some of those elements that you think are important for building executive presence?
See, executive presence is not just words, but it's more importantly deeds. And when I say deeds, what I mean is that, if today we are talking about driving up the value of the company from a brand perspective, or we are talking about delivering a consistent message across employees, or we are talking about, generating leads for the company, then that has to be manifested by hardcore numbers. That has to be manifested by results, you know. And for example, when I joined SunTec a few months back, we charted for ourselves a mandate of how we would go about doing our communications. What were the 3 or 4 things that we would anchor our communications on, which would drive business results for the company?
Right.
So I drew up a 4-month plan. I said, 4 months, what do we achieve? And there was a lot of foundational work that needed to be done. Then now we've reached the next stage. So now we're looking at the next 4 or 5 months. And we're saying, what do we do, for the next period? What do we achieve? And what we did across those 4 months is, even as we kind of crossed milestones, okay, we kept the stakeholders informed of what we've done. So people can see momentum. They see it's, things are happening. And when they see things are happening, it becomes infectious. And then people say, okay, I think we are moving in the right direction. We set up meetings to see whether we needed to course correct.
Right.
I do a weekly meeting with my leadership where I tell them what we've done. So we have a status update. It's a formal meeting. It's just 45 minutes, but we share a presentation where I tell them what we've done. I also tell them what we've not done, and tell them what we have left, what are the dependencies. Sometimes the dependency could be on them,
Right.
that they haven't, gone ahead with something or the other. So we go through that process every week, and this is with the topmost management of the company. And
Got
then
it.
consistently keep colleagues informed, particularly the stakeholders. So that's the first step, identify who these stakeholders are. keep them informed about what progress you're making. So ultimately, that's what I mean by deeds, because unless people can see what is going on, you're just one desk in a corner of some office and forgotten most of the time. And I just like to say that this is even more critical in this current pandemic age, because all of us are sitting isolated in our own, cubby holes at home. How do people know what's happening? That is why when I set up the plan, I didn't set one ambitious 1 year target, 5 year target. I said 4 months. Now we are in the next 4 months, and then we'll take it, step by step. That's
Got it.
exactly how you need to respond in this kind of a situation.
Fantastic. What I hear you say is that there has to be that rigor, and there has to be that part of taking people along in the journey, and that would make people trust you, and then it adds to executive presence, which you can command really.
Absolutely. See, Anishu, don't forget this is a very human thing. Ultimately, it's like you meet somebody in a bus, okay, and you're sitting next to this person, or you're on a flight and you're sitting next to this person, and you kind of make eye contact. Then maybe you start conversing. Then you're trying to find common ground. Where are you from? Which school did you go to? And then things build up into a conversation. It's
Got
not
it.
it's not different in the workplace. You have to win the trust of your colleagues. That's important. And then there is momentum.
Right. So, I mean, related to that, I think there's always this thought that, communications has a big role to play, and even personalities. So some people are introverts, some people are extroverts, some people are, a hybrid. But what is the role you think, which plays out for executive presence when it comes to communications and, personalities?
See, people, for example, in my case, I'm not too much of an extrovert, so I would rather sit at home than be at a party, for example, unless I know people very well. That's my personality type. But there are always people in your team, in a communications team, who have that ability to talk and be outgoing and lead the charge from the front.
Right.
All you need to do is enable them to do that, empower them to do that. I find that in my own team currently, in SunTec. There are some people who are, I mean, assess the skills. There are some people who are more outward. There are some people who prefer to make independent decisions. So
Got
as long as you set the framework and enable them to do whatever needs to be done,
it.
and they are within that framework, that's good, because everybody then is singing from the same sheet, except that some are in the front and some are not, which is fine. You know.
Got it.
So you just need to assess the skills within your team. I think that's the most important.
Fantastic. And if you could share an example or a story or an anecdote of, a particular leader or a manager who has, communicated or demonstrated executive presence, or someone who has not, and, what did they do and what went about it?
I think to me, the most memorable part of my career so far has been my 10 years in iFlix. And I think over there, we saw leadership right from the chairman downwards. So we saw Rajesh Huku, and it's interesting because Rajesh was most of the time not in India. He was sitting remotely. And all of us, most of us rather, from a delivery perspective, were sitting in India. But he managed to, if I may say, make his presence felt, because he was always communicating. And I think
Right.
that was important, because it's not that he came out of his shell, once in a while and talked. He was always communicating. He was always in the front line. He was always, ready to kind of, lead the charge. And I think most importantly, his door was always open. So, there was no formal process of gaining a conversation with him. I mean,
Right.
anybody could send an email, and ask him, what he thought about something, and he would give an answer. So
Right.
I think that is what is most important. And I think the second thing is, we used to have these town halls, and you were part of iFlix as well. You know what it was like. We used to have these town halls where everybody would be together. If you really analyze that in the context of where we were at that time and what we were trying to achieve, he always brought the communication down to the level that people would understand. I remember, when we were ranked in the IBS league table for the first time, and we were number one in that league table. He wanted to send out a mail, and so he asked me, he said, "Can you draft a mail?" So I drafted a very standard congratulatory mail, and as usual, being politically correct, congratulating everybody and teams and individuals and whatever else for the contribution. It was a milestone.
Right.
Or actually, it was not about number one. It was when we reached our 100th sale, and it was all this. And then he said, "Just give me, 24 hours. I'll come back to you." And he actually redrafted that entire mail, and he
Mm.
connected it with the game of cricket
Mm.
and how we reached the century, and so he had that ability to bring out the emotion. And when I contrasted my draft and his draft, I mean, there was such a world of difference because the entire communication talked to the floor.
Mm.
People related to it because he talked about the 100, he talked about the fours and the sixes and the wickets which fell in between and all the rest of it. And you could relate that. So that I think is the most critical. And I think I admire him for that because he was able to carry the people with him. And that
Got
is
it.
what a good leader is. So a good leader is not about standing on the dais and screaming away, but it's about being able to influence people in their everyday work and relate to them in a
Mm.
language that they understand. I think that is really what it is.
Fantastic. And as we wrap up, Peter, I just want to ask you, there are a lot of communicators out there who often struggle to get a seat at the table, convince their leaders, move things along. So what's your advice for communicators, and how can they build executive presence?
See, we are all human beings, and all of us will not trust anybody until we really see something.
Mm.
So I think, seeing is what will, yield results ultimately. So I believe that if you really want to be successful, the way to
Mm.
do it is pick up smaller things which are measurable and achievable, or what,
Right.
as people say, the low-hanging fruit.
Right.
Get going with that, show the results, get a
Mm.
few people on your side, influence them, you know. So there could be people in the organization, it's just like when you're going out into the market. There's your target audience and then there's your influencers.
Right.
Start with your influencers. Talk to
Mm.
people around, maybe the sales team, maybe a couple of folk in delivery, whoever it is. Talk to those guys, get them on your side, bounce off things with them. See, very often the thing is we think something is right, we go ahead and start trying to execute it.
Right.
Bounce off with some of the veterans in the organization. Ask them, will this work? Will this not? Make sure that you put your program on a path to success. Once you're able to do that and start showing results consistently, then you will get a seat anywhere. You'll
Mm.
be, the board will listen to you. And anybody will listen to you because everybody goes by results.
Mm.
Ultimately, if you really think about it, it's about metrics, it's about results, and it's about how you've been able to achieve things in line with the vision of what the company is all about. I think that is really what you need to keep in mind. So ultimately, if you ask me, the bottom line, in my view, in any good communication is audience. Understand your audience, understand your customer, and your
Right.
customer in this case is an internal customer, and then kind of relate to them. I think that's what I would say.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Peter. I think this has been brilliant and great insights. I'm sure our audience will love all what you said shared. Thank you so much for doing
Hey,
this.
happy to be part of this, Anishu, and all the best. Thank you.